So, welcome everyone to Tama Talks. Today's talk is our second in a series happening each Friday in February. And here with us today and for all of our remaining sessions is Max Presneill, an artist himself who is also the director and curator of the Torrance Art Museum. Max will share his insights on the work of the artists that we present, and more importantly, will answer any questions from anyone from those tuning in. I'm Janine Madden, the TAMA president, and I would really like to extend a thank you to Danielle Johnson, our advocacy chairperson. She can't be here with us today, but she'll hear this on the recording. And she was the one who suggested a closer look at the works of James Turrell. I found myself, just because I'm a nature girl, I found myself really wanting to travel to the crater, the Rodin crater in Arizona, as we make our way from the East Coast, where we are now, to the West Coast in a couple of months. But it is actually a work in progress, and it's not open to the public. And so what is open to the public is our TAMA talk today. And so we're going to go ahead and get started. And I'm going to let Max kind of give us a little disclaimer about himself before we start.
Okay, so I'll repeat these when we do these sessions, which is basically I'm not approaching these as an art historian because I'm not. I'm approaching them as an artist, and I do a little bit of reading, but I think that my place in all of this is to kind of come up with ways of thinking about these artists critically, and for us to have a discussion about what that might mean. How should we kind of approach all art? All art needs to be taken critically, and some of these examples, like James Turrell that we'll see today, there are plenty of things to think about in regards to how we feel about what he does.
Perfect. So again, just like last week when we talked about Mark Rothko, um, James Turrell is a living artist who has a website, and I will direct you to that. I can throw this URL in the chat if you'd like. And so we really want to maximize the time that we have with Max. We can go a little bit longer this week. I didn't realize last week we cut off pretty quickly. Just as a so there's a couple of features in Zoom that are kind of fun if you can find them. You can just show your hands because you're all on video. But how many of you had heard of James Turrell before today's Tama Talk? Yeah, so I had not either, and for the longest time I was calling him John, and when Danielle had to make her talk in front of the city council to let folks know we were doing this today, she had me corrected, and so I had not heard of his work before. He has worked directly with light and space to create artworks that engage viewers with the limits and wonder of human perception. That's straight off his website. Curiously, I was on a Zoom call on Monday with the Denver Public Library for an art session with a live artist that they do each week. And the artist leading it used James Turrell as one of his influencers, along with Korean artist Lee Ufan. And just like that experience, I found that there's new artists out, so many artists out there, and when you're not a student of art, it's really interesting all the different places that you hear about artists. So thought that was odd for me that he was brought up, and sorry, I'm letting folks in. He was brought up during this talk, and I was like, oh, we're going to talk about him this week. I found his artist statement to be a bit curious, though, because it is summarily quite different than the desires that we read about with Mark Rothko last week. From his website, he says, my work is more about your seeing than it is about my seeing, although it is a product of my seeing. I'm also interested in the sense of presence of space. That is space where you feel a presence, almost an entity, that physical feeling and power that space can give. Um, and so the similarities there is that in both cases, you really there must be a required presence. It's really beneficial to be standing, especially for Turrell, where it's highly interactive. But as Max pointed out last week, standing in front of a Rothko is so completely different than um, looking at an image either on a computer screen or even in a book. Max, do you have anything to add about that? Or do you want to go right into
Well,
the video?
I think we should maybe look at some of the images.
Okay, so in 1977, James Turrell began a monumental project at Roden Crater, an extinct volcano. This is the part I really liked, in northern Arizona. Continuing the practice begun in his Ocean Park studio, Turrell has sculptured the dimensions of the crater bowl and cut a series of chambers, tunnels, and apertures within the volcano that heighten our sense of the heavens and the earth. And so this is what I was talking about earlier, and I'll put this link in the chat. But he sort of created this artwork in the sort of I don't know if it's in the caldera of the crater of the volcano, but it is on the site of an extinct volcano, which I think is in and of itself is pretty cool. I'm going to go ahead and just show a couple of images, and then we can go back to the video. These are called Skyspaces. It's a specifically proportioned chamber with an aperture in the ceiling that's open to the sky. Skyspaces can be autonomous structures or integrated into existing architecture, and the aperture can be round, ovular, or square. And I want to show this one too. This is an example of his sky space called Above, Between, and Below. It was done in 2011. What do you notice when you look at particularly that center piece? And feel free to unmute or comment in the comments.
It moves.
Yeah. What's in this piece that we don't often see when we're looking at like a painting?
People.
Yeah, people. So it is one of those interactive pieces where a person must be a part of it to experience it completely. Same thing here. Can you see? I'm not sure how large this is, and if you're on full screen, you could probably see this better. But again, there's a structure here. Can you see the people sitting on the bottom in the foreground?
Yeah.
So it's very experiential, right? So he has created this sort of room outside where you're looking up into the sky. In this case, you're looking up into the night sky, but I think it would be cool to kind of just camp out there and, you know, experience a whole 24 hours in that space.
That's interesting. You're experiencing the image of people experiencing the image
Yeah.
from different perspectives.
Yes. It reminds me, and again, it reminds me of a docent tour that Max gave really a long time ago, maybe when I first moved to California, and it was something to the effect of being an artist, creating, like you're creating your canvas right in that moment. So you're creating an image that we're ultimately going to look at, but the act of creating it is taking place at the time that you're creating it. And I'm sure I got it wrong, but I remember you commenting on that a really long time ago. When did you start at the TAM?
2009.
Yeah, and we got there in 2000. I think we got there in 2006, and so I remember volunteering and I remember you saying something, and it might have just been about your own work, but the idea that you're creating it in the here and now when you're making it.
Might be in relationship to the idea of performance art. That performance art, there's performance art and then there's documentation, and documentation isn't performance art, it's documentation of performance art, and because it exists in the actual performance at a given time. and that anything else is a trace of it, not the experience of it.
Okay, and would you consider then Turrell's work to be more experiential,
Well,
obviously,
yeah,
or
absolutely.
yeah, okay. All right. This is called Twilight Epiphany. Um, and here is an example. This is called Raising Cain, Kayne. Again, a very different feel in the day. I selected this photograph too because I like the reflective aspect of it. The fact that the pool is just so still that you can see. I have a thing about reflections, but that it's just a mirror image created by this reflecting pool, and then looks like there are a series of chairs on the in the interior from again which to view that sky. Max, what are you
Mhm.
thinking?
Well, there's a bunch of things here that start that worry me. So, and the first of it, I would respond to what you just said, which about the reflection is, um, why is this not high-end interior design or architectural follies? And what that question, of course, asks, again, and when it's an architectural folly, is this a plaything of the rich?
Yeah.
Because my question would, this is going to get, I'm going to have to go into this.
It's
Okay,
okay, just do it. We're ready to hear you.
so everybody likes Turrell's works. They're really easy to like. They're um, scaled in a very ambitious and spectacle kind of way. But if we ask ourselves, what do they do and where do they do it? A set of questions come up that might make that a little bit more difficult. Now, there's two ways. First of all, most of these shots that we have, well, not many of his works are actually made specifically for high-end collectors, and they are things that they can take their friends to show. They're not open to the public. They're not collected. There are some out there that show in museums, etc., on occasion, but mostly they're not. To go to the Rodin Crater itself, I believe, costs $6,500 to be allowed in.
I guess I won't be stopping there on our way.
Might have changed now, but I think that was the going rate.
Okay.
Again, I don't know who has $6,500 playing around to go and look at the night sky. Now, the question is this, I guess, is in the search for the sublime, does his act of framing it give you that, or does it just cut down and make theatrical the experience that one has by looking at the night sky? There is something of the sublime and something awesome about standing out in the middle of nowhere where there's no lights to get in the way to look at the night sky, no doubt. What that interaction is with nature, etc., tells us about the modern experience of living in cities and being urban, etc. What that tells us is another question about society and our relationship to nature. But what his experience gives you is you're looking at the sky. And I'm not convinced that the act of him framing the sky gives us the sublime. So, number one, is it as cool as it is, and as much as he plays with perception, which he undoubtedly does extremely well, the act of playing with perception in itself isn't the sublime. It might be awe-inspiring, and it might be, there's a fantastical element to it, but it in itself isn't anything else but a magician's trick, because you're like, oh my gosh, how did he do it? That's phenomenal. That's what magicians do, and I love magicians. They still make me giggle like a child with surprise, and astonishment. But again, but we don't assign anything deeper to that, and I think we assign something deeper to these works because he tells us that's what they're about. Where what my question would be: are we getting that real experience, or are we just getting a really great spectacle? Now, there's a couple of things. If anybody's interested, I can put this on the chat, but there's a great deal to be said about problems with the idea of the spectacle. I'll just put a quick thing there for you if you're interested. Because essentially the argument would be that it's like it's avoidance of action, and it's a passive intake of the world, which enables the world to not be politically challenged. And it functions in the same, the society of the spectacle functions in the same way as the idea of the Roman bread and circuses. That as long as we're deflected by these things of spectacle that we can become engaged with, that we probably won't actually do anything to change anything that matters. It's a convoluted argument here. But I do think that there is an argument to be made that that the experience that he's giving the viewer is just spectacle, because the sky is the sky.
I was just going to say, so is it just the idea that I'm just framing a portion of the sky where, as if I just stepped to the side, I'd see the whole thing?
Well, you know, how many times have all of us watched the sun go down here in California and thought, wow, that is beautiful. Doesn't matter whether it's smog causing it, it's beautiful. And if I stuck a frame around it, is it more beautiful? Am I having a better sublime experience, or am I just having a mediated experience via the artist that concentrates the perception on the artist's intervention rather than the thing you're supposedly looking at? Because let's get this straight. People don't look at the night sky when they're looking at Turrell's works in real life. What they do is they're watching the environment and they're looking and thinking, wow, look at the way he's cut a hole in the roof. That's making the way I perceive the sky change. But this, to me, is the equivalent of talking about a frame. You know, you don't ignore the painting. Let's look at the frame.
Okay.
I know this isn't a popular idea.
No, I mean, again, I think, as you mentioned earlier, possessing a degree of criticality in almost everything we look at, I think, can help us better understand what it is that we are looking at. In this case, you're saying, if I understand you correctly, the argument you're making is that if we're looking at the sky on a beautifully sunny day with majestic clouds moving by, we don't necessarily need a piece of material framing it to help us see it any more clearly.
Well, I do think that again, it's the thing between this hand in hand thing with the ultra rich, that you, and he's never finished this. I mean, that Roman code is still not open anyway, which makes it difficult because it's an unfinished work. And should you ever really have, you know, any kind of critique of an unfinished work, but even the works that he does have, to put on there's two things to do with the financial here. To put on a Turrell show for you to watch and go, wow, look, that is a perceptual game that we can play, which is a known psychological, these are known scientific ways of playing with the brain. I'm not sure there's any art in that, except that you present them in a museum and it makes it art. Now, to do a show at a museum for him costs a lot of money that isn't going somewhere else. The other thing is estimates for the cost of the Rodin crater, for instance, are well over the $200 million mark. $200 million mark. Okay, now let me just put this into perspective. The structure is designed to last, quote, designed to last hundreds of years, will also be accompanied by an amphitheater, a restaurant, and lodgings. This is a huge $200 million plus temple to one artist's idea of looking at the sky. Now, is the temple to one artist who tells you should look at the sky and he frames it for you, is that worth $200 million plus dollars? Okay, so there's that one side of things, which I think needs discussing. There's a lot of money needed in the art world. Does it need it so you can stand in a crater in the middle of the desert and look at the sky? I'm having a problem with this. So I think there is how this feeds into a form of narcissistic artistic behavior, which we're all, artists are maybe often narcissistic to some degree, and is necessary probably to believe that people should pay attention to what you have to say to them. But this seems to me an extreme, and it's an extreme that I'm not convinced by. But if we take away this idea of follies for the rich and the playing with privilege, which is evident here, that's somebody's house that we're looking at the image. So if we remove those kind of things, my question is still this: is there content? These are amazing experiences, but amazing experiences aren't necessarily content packed. So if it isn't, then what is it? It's a perceptual thing with no content. Fine, and don't get me wrong, it's an enjoyable thing, but does it make it valuable outside of a very kind of less rich and complex experiences? Once you've left, what kind of experience can you have from it, as opposed to many other art forms where you see something and it can be a really major kind of consideration for you for a long time. I'm sure you can, with his works, have considerations, but when they're so based in that perceptual moment, I'm wondering what happens afterwards. I don't know. But the major thing for me here is if this is to do with the sublime in some ways, and it's connected into his ability, like a priest, to modify that engagement with the sublime. What are we getting out of this? Because if there's some kind of spiritual aim, it's that kind of argument between Catholics and Protestants. Well, if I can have it, get out of the way. And so I think some of the discussions need to go in that direction. And I do think that the amount of amazed response that one can have to these things is truly incredible. But surprise and delight isn't the sublime.
Sure.
So where do we, what do we say is going on here besides, wow, that's fantastic?
Sure. No, I do, and I understand. I guess the only thing I can kind of, in my mind, compare it to, of course, would just be my own experiences. But like when we saw Bryce Canyon for the first time, like just through my own peripheral vision frame, that image has stuck with me for, I mean, it was majesty beyond anything I could ever, I was just flabbergasted at its beauty. And
Did it need somebody to come along with a cutout square and place it in front of it for you to have an enhanced experience?
no, and I probably would have been upset had there been something like that, because it really would have limited what I was seeing. And it's interesting, I'm a stargazer and like a meteor watcher, right? So I always find that when I'm out watching for meteors during a meteor shower, I am not happy when there are trees in the way or houses or roofs or anything, because the larger the visual field for me, the greater probability it is that I'm going to see something.
Yeah.
So let me move. I understand your arguments very much so. Let me move to a piece. These are these projection pieces where he is not incorporating. There's two, let me just go through really quick. There are projection pieces which are created by projecting a single controlled beam of light from the opposing corner of the room. This one is called Afram Pale Pink, that he did in 1968. So it's not like he just started doing this last year. And then there's this piece. These are space division constructions, also called aperture works, which consist of large horizontal apertures, which appear to be flat paintings or an LED screen, but is actually a light emitting opening to a seemingly infinite light filled room beyond. Explain it to us, because I particularly I just want to know how it works. This is different. That's one of those
These really are amazing to see in real life, because they do fool the eye and how the brain is interpreting them. But again, my biggest complaint with op art is oh, it can make the eye wander. Yeah, that's a technique in the same way as it's a woman's head. It's a rabbit. You get that Gestaltian shift in seeing. These are neat tricks to kind of to show you how the mind can change. How the mind is affected by how you're seeing something. And I think they're incredible. But it literally is like bad science example. It's the kind of thing I expect at somebody at the best possible ever science class in school, at high school, to say, look at this. This is how the brain functions. But when I put this into the context of art, and the context of art for me is to do with content more than it is just perceptions. Flatly, just like a visual perception of how and how the mind is interpreting in some way. Be careful with that. Sorry, how the mind is just taking in visual information in some way. I ask myself why. I mean, they truly are incredible, and they're beautiful, and the colors he decides to use. Well, how can you not like these? But liking them doesn't mean they're important.
Do you feel the same way about infinity rooms?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Because for me, it's the same sort of thing. Like, I love them just because that sort of feeling of being able, that idea of it being replicated and replicated. But I think what you're trying to help us understand is that being in situations like the Infinity Room at the Denver Art Museum, which is extraordinarily cool, but it's just that, like you said, it's cool. And so how different is that? Just because is it art? And you get back to that question of what's art and who says what art is. And
One of the things I think it's important that we all kind of get to some kind of agreement in is that this by no means doesn't implies that you shouldn't like it or indeed love it. I mean, there are things that one just loves. I love the taste of ice cream. It doesn't matter if it's important. It doesn't matter if it has content. I like the taste of ice cream. I love the taste of ice cream, and I think it's you can have those experiences with Turrell's work and still say, it's I find it contentless, but it's super engaging. It's a great experience. But and this is why I thought this was a great choice to talk about today, is because it's so likable. We often allow that to substitute for the analytical work that's needed when confronting art and trying to there are artists out there who aren't very good, who I love their work, but I know they're not very good. There are, on the other side of it, there are people who I can recognize as being immensely talented and important, and I don't like the work. It doesn't do anything for me. Let me
that's
just do
okay.
this.
Is that like the Jeff Koons blow up the balloon animals?
I tend to be Emperor's New Clothes about Jeff Koons, to be honest. I think Jeff Koons is like a genius at marketing. I'm not so sure about how good an artist he is.
Sure. And I think that you and I were talking about it. I'm just going to go through this last couple of them. We're doing good on time. This is a Gansfield, a German word to describe the phenomenon of a total loss of depth perception, as in the experience of a whiteout. And again, I think now, based on what you have said, and please pipe in and put in the chat or just talk freely, but I think you're highlighting for us the difference between something that we're seeing that we enjoy and something that has content that will the experience, like experiential art. Although, like when I think about looking at a Rothko, I feel like that's also experiential, but maybe in a different way.
Yeah, I think Rothko and Turrell are both sharing the journey from their religious backgrounds into a way of essentially setting up a spiritual religious experience in some ways, or an attempt at a religious or spiritual experience. And they are both experiential. You do have to be in front of them or in them to really appreciate that. The question is whether that happens or not, and how it might happen. With Rothko, I think there is nothing between you and the painting. You stand there and you watch the painting, and he's very careful, like we said before, about lighting and etc., having benches so you can spend time. That's not like, but with Turrell's work, when I've been present, I spend as much time looking at how it's done and the setting and like I said, the framing. And so for me, I'm I'm an atheist and I take an atheist position on this kind of stuff. I'm unconvinced by the idea of what the spiritual means, and I'm unconvinced that one can have what religious experiences might actually be. That's my stance on it. But I do think that there are experiences and important experiences one can have with art. I've had them myself. What they are is the question. Now I can see how you might have that with Rothko in whatever form you do. But again, if what I'm seeing is, and I can't distance myself from the knowledge that for most of Rothko, for most of Turrell's work, I'm looking at something I look at all the time. It's the sky. It's a beautiful day today. It's blue. Okay. And the fact that I'm looking out of my window, if I'm paying as much attention to the window frame, because what I'm seeing in the sky is just blue and that weird kind of depth problem that goes on. Because most of the time, of course, you look up in Arizona, there is nothing but a sky blue color. There's nothing wandering across. You don't have anything happening in it. It's a hovering blue. And I just don't personally find that convincing as a spiritual or religious experience in the ways that he, as a Quaker or growing up as a Quaker, seems to need to work to function in that kind of arena. I'm unconvinced by it. In which case, is it a failure? Because look, my belief is that good and bad art is as much to do with how successful is it at achieving its own aims, not my aims, not anybody else's. How well does it achieve the aims of the artist? If the aims of the artist are to have this spiritual, religious experience, but the framing is getting in the way, and the fact is you're just looking at a slate of blue, or you're looking at the skies and look at all the stars. Wow, that's fantastic. Well, that's a Star Trek experience. That isn't a God experience. That's looking at the sky and saying, oh, wouldn't it be interesting to travel there? I wonder if there's people out there. Are there civilizations, etc.? Oh, the immensity, it's awe-inspiring. I can't imagine infinity. All these things. But that, like I say, that's Star Trek. In some ways, maybe it's more akin to how cathedrals were built to try and make you feel small, because then God's big, and that you're in the right place to have that experience. And this reminds me of a kind of a modernist idea of a cathedral where we can look and we can all pray together in awe of the or whatever kind of God you think is looking back.
Like the Mark Rothko Chapel.
Yeah, I mean, it explicitly called it a chapel. I mean, this to me is a one man's temple.
Right.
And one always worries about cults.
Sure. Well, have you been to and I'm sorry because I haven't been in LA for a while, but tell me the name of the chapel up kind of as you're going to the Lloyd Wright son. Is it Frank Lloyd Wright's son? What, Wayfarer's Chapel. Have you been there?
Yeah.
Okay. Because that's a very interesting place, like architecturally, but there are lots of spaces to look out and see nature. It's a very interesting kind of a structure for me. And you kind of bring up this idea of architecture, like when you talked about this piece. Was it this piece maybe, or this piece? Oh, let's use this piece.
It doesn't matter.
They're all this, yeah, right. This idea that architecture as art, like the Disney concert hall or the
doesn't that, I mean, for all of you, doesn't that become a difficult kind of I want to be really, really open about what art might be. And I would say that art can be anything anybody designates as art. That doesn't make it good art. And when I look at, say, the Disney Hall, for instance, it's an interesting architect's work. It's a building. Do I think it works in the way that I think art functions? No, I don't think it does. And when I look at these images here, I think are a really good example. This is an interior decorator, or of a grand scale. I mean, yeah, here's my pavilion thing. And like I said, folly. I mean, buildings as follies architecturally. That's what it is. This functions in the same way as follies did in the 18th, 19th centuries. It's where the rich can have something built, where other people can go there, sit in them, and go, ooh, contemplate.
Now, do you think that that was Turrell's impetus from the beginning?
I think that I've seen this many, many times before and continue to, is that some people become fascinated with perception, and then and by illustrating it continuously, tells you nothing about the science of it, and tells you nothing about the art, because there's no art content. It's all about the building this frame to say, look at this. Again, Gestaltian shifts, etc. They're amazing, but after you've seen one, why see another? Except for the kind of like, oh look, now I see it. That moment, is it art? No, I don't think so. And when I look at these things, I mean, if I was at the one on the left, I'm looking at blue sky. You know what? The blue sky, looking out my window, there's some mountains there. That's pretty awesome looking. Is that a better sky than my sky because he's framed it with an orange thing that causes a shift there? No, because all it does is transfer your attention from the sky into the relationship of the space that he's built, the architectural framing that he's provided. Now, if it's all about the architectural framing, it's a little dull.
Sure. Interesting.
I must say that there is a quote, and I didn't get it ready for you guys, but it does say that they are to describe Turrell's work is dull, but to experience them is magical. And I agree. I mean, to actually be and see these in real life is quite magical. But magic is fun because you're being fooled.
Sure. Interesting. Anybody have anything to contribute, or in the chat, or you're such a quiet group. I don't remember this on our tours on Fridays. We always had so many questions for Max.
I have kind of a poorly formed thought that's sort of been threading throughout. Max said, is this a toy for the rich or a plaything for the rich? Or do you recall saying that at the poolside one? Anyway, and I guess thinking about, like I said, this is not a well-formed thought. If you're very rich, and you could literally pretty much have what you want. You can have one of these installed in your backyard because it'd be nice, Then perhaps the limiting has an appeal. Now, whether or not that's art, I'm not sure, but it may have an appeal to be able to restrict what everybody can have the entire sky, but not everyone can have a piece of it, a view of it restricted by Turrell.
Collectors for you.
Excuse me?
That's collectors for you.
Yeah. It's just been a train of thought as I observe them.
Candy says, art to me is one big illusion when I am painting on a blank canvas.
Oh.
By if there's nothing on there you're creating, of course it's illusion. It doesn't. If you're trying to say make a figurative image, particularly, and it depends on how you paint, because if you're painting, say, a purely abstract painting, it is what it is, or a minimal painting where it is exactly what it is. Therefore, it isn't an illusion. It is what it is. And I don't see any problems with illusionism. figurative art is an illusion, and it's fine. It can be important, form, and it can be engaging. It can be all the things one most wants, perhaps from art. I think that the thing to is to distinguish what we're talking about here isn't illusion. In the little article that I recommended in there, it's really interesting because the writer talks about these as being minimalist art because they are what they are in terms of looking through the sky, and there's nothing there to distract you. It just is this thing. I don't think it's a really interesting line that he follows in the article that he wrote. And he, and the artist himself was at pains to sort of say, well, it isn't land art, and light and space is a. I mean, it's true, but I think that maybe he stands alone in some ways from that. But they are illusions in some ways because they play with your perception of where space lies, etc. Would never be my complaint about them. It's not what they do to the eye, it's what the artist uses that for. What do you say that's important to say and is said well enough by the use of illusionism or whatever you present? I don't mind what the method is, but you've got to have something there that's important to say more than golly gee whiz. That's incredible. I really like that. Like I said, ice cream's great. Not sure that I'm going to find God through it.
Sure. This last piece that we're looking at is a photograph taken by a gentleman by the name of David Shankbone, who was pretty specific about making sure that you said his name if you showed this image. And this is the image of Turrell's work at the Guggenheim. And Max and I were chatting before we started, and it kind of begs the question, almost like when I was coming up with the idea for the name of the Friday series, which was Famous Artists, and I did it for my penchant for alliteration, but at the end of the day, I think maybe significant artists, or, when we sort of opened it up, the word famous is so subjective, and by seeing this piece here where it's at the Guggenheim, we have to it kind of begs the question, what makes somebody famous, or what makes their work famous? And Max was commenting on all of the different things that come into play. I would assume it applies, and Candy can relate to this, I would assume it applies to, what makes musical artists famous, and what makes, chefs famous, and how that big machine works, and famous authors, and I guess anybody who's famous. I don't know if you could just kind of burst on the scene. I guess that's a term that's used often, though, is how does that process even happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that I think most of the artists that manage to become famous artists are very, very talented. But I do think the Emperor's New Clothes are present sometimes. And I do think that what one should always be aware of, that being well known as an artist doesn't mean that you're the best that was out there. It means that you had access and the ability to navigate through, and the support from the systems that are in place of critics and galleries and museums and curators, and importantly, collectors. Because collectors, if they put enough money, and a few of them do it, they put the money into a certain artist, they can create that and keep it in place because they're on the boards of the museums, and they have a financial interest in not allowing that person to disappear and to maintain their prominence through museum exhibitions, etc. I think once you've gotten that track, I mean, if this costs 200+ million, he has to get that money from somewhere. And people can invest into it in various ways, or donate, etc. You got 10 million off of Kanye West, I think. But whether that makes it, I mean, it will make it a spectacle, and it will make it just super impressive, but it won't change content.
We probably could do a whole Tama talk just on content. We ran a little bit over. We were trying to hold these to about 45 minutes. I know we had said 30, and then we could stretch it a little bit. Does anybody have any questions at all? I know Candy threw hers into the chat, but does anybody have any questions or comments or anything you'd like to see? Any artists you'd like to for us to feature in Tama Talks over the next week? We really want to keep this going. Next week we have Kandinsky.
Samuel, come on. I know you know lots of artists, and I know there's loads of them in there that you're interested in. Same for you, Iris. Come on.
Yeah, throw it in the chat if you.
Andy, all the artists you look at when they influence your own work, who is it you're interested in? Kitty, I'm sure you have a number that you're interested in too.
Yeah, but please be sure. Like I said, Max is extraordinarily open to discussing whatever we want to at this time. We did it just to kind of fill in that gap of not being able to be at the museum and not being able to have our tours with him and seeing new exhibitions. So this really is for the docents as well as TAMA members, and thank you to Candy and to Iris for being TAMA docents who are, what's the matter?
Raising my hand.
Oh, yes, there you go.
It took me a moment to recall his name. And I think he has exhibited at TAM. Omar Gallegos? Does that sound familiar?
Say again?
Omar Gallegos?
I don't know. I'd have to look. I mean, we have been through many hundreds of artists.
Yeah, do you remember what gallery?
He did a piece. He did some goofy things, some assemblage sort of stuff. I have one of his works. I bought it at one of the Odysseys. So, I mean, I've already suggested, I mean, we did someone I suggested, but I would throw him in. I think his work is kind of peculiar.
That might be interesting as a cold drop-in critique without having any background knowledge or being able to do any research on them.
That's the other thing is that for us to put these Friday things together, there is a bit of time and research, which is fine. It's perfectly fine. But there is something to be said for talking about a piece that you really don't know anything about. Like, to just throw a piece in there and talk about it from our various different perspectives. Ours tend to be just lookers, right? We're just looking at it and we don't really know much about it, which is really what most of us are confronted with when we go into a museum or a gallery or the TAM, and we don't, many of us, I'm sure Max noted that when we were doing our TAM walkthroughs, that between Gallery 1 and Gallery 2 and even the dark room, some of what was in there was just beyond our ability to understand it, and you kind of walked us through it. So.
Well, no, I attempted to, because sometimes I come across things that I have no idea.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and are you finding that with Hobson's Choice too, or not so much?
I think that the job of Hobson's Choice is a very different one from that. I mean, it's looking at what people are doing right now and kind of thinking, well, that's engaging, or that's intriguing, or or it's a new direction for the artist if you're familiar with what they do. I mean, what goes into the choices on that are much vaster in terms, because it could be for any reason, just because some of them you might look at and have no clue and think that in itself is interesting. And it has to be kind of like a variety, and some of it are more topically based and relevant right now, and other ones are just like, that's really interesting, that's fantastic.
Sure.
It's a very different forum than say curating in real life, if you like, into the galleries. It's a different criteria.
Okay. Okay. Would love to hear more about that. I think, again, we're all just really hungry for anything that has to do with what happens over at the TAM there. So we are just about out of time. We are going to be featuring the work of Vasily Kandinsky next Friday. We're also having next Friday an exclusive members only event, and we've been pretty lucky. Most of the folks who are logging on, if not everybody, is a member. But we are going to be having a members only event just before the Kandinsky talk on art preferences. And so, what you like, why you like it, what you don't, why you don't like it, and just sharing our personal favorites will be the focus of that event. I'll put a RSVP up on the website. The link will be the same as the link to Kandinsky, which I'll send out again just for folks to have if they need it. Certainly let your friends and family know that we're doing these. They're very, very interesting. And we'd also love your feedback. So when you're done, if you want to send us an email and let us know what worked, what didn't, we are super interested in all of that as well. So our goal here is just to kind of keep everybody in the loop. Tam has new stuff on their website. How frequently does Hobson's Choice post? Wednesdays and Fridays?
Twice a week, I think, at the moment.
Yeah, I think so too. Shout out to Jason who's listening. He's been doing all that posting. Jason yesed us, so he's letting us know those 2 days, every Wednesday and Friday. I think that's it, everyone. Any last minute, anything at all? Well, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. Well done.
Thank you, guys. It's good
Appreciate it.
seeing you at these things.
Yeah.
Yeah, we hope more folks can. Hey, Valerie, we hope more folks can log in, and it's really nice to see everyone. So
Yeah, can't wait to see you guys in real life again. It's been way too long, and I'm not normally a sentimental kind of fellow, as you know.
all right, everyone, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and end the meeting or end the session, and we'll see you all next week.